Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this month's session of Academy on Air. Today, we will be specifically focusing on the subject of mobile speed. Now, if you've attended some of our previous sessions, you've probably heard that mobile is a critical part of your advertising strategy or your website strategy in general. And today we would like to focus on one specific aspect within that, which is to do with your mobile sites. Now, I believe most of you are probably in the advertising field or are representing some sort of an advertising agency or do advertise on Google AdWords yourself. And what I feel this subject will help you understand is how to look at your AdWords performance in a way that goes beyond your AdWords account. Now, one of the more important pieces of making sure that your online marketing strategy works well is to make sure that all this great traffic that you gather from different kinds of advertising channels, when it lands up on your website, that you don't lose that traffic due to, say, a poor quality experience. Which is why I think today's session will make a lot of sense for you to take that lens from beyond AdWords, but to look at how your website can really help in influencing your online marketing strategy in general. Now, when we speak about mobile site performance, it's obviously more important than ever, as most of you might have already experienced it, and this is a trend that we notice almost around the world. Most websites have already reached that point where more than 50% of their traffic has started coming on mobile or through smartphones. And what this essentially means is that while probably previously when you were looking at your websites, you were probably designing them from the perspective of a desktop user, it is imperative that today, when you look at your mobile websites, that you think of a smartphone user, oftentimes a user who will not look beyond the smartphone device while interacting with your business or through your website. Now, when we speak about mobile site performance, of course, like a 1-hour session wouldn't be enough. It is a pretty vast topic, but I would like to focus on one specific aspect of this, which I feel is solvable or can be worked upon on an immediate effect or over a short term or a short period of time. And what I'm specifically referring to is the aspect of speed. Now, as you know, and most of you are smartphone users yourselves, we know that users on smartphones tend to be a lot more finicky. They have quite fascinatingly a very, very low amount of patience. So if you make them wait, chances are that they'll go back to the search engine and look for an alternative website if your website doesn't load fast enough. And that is extremely detrimental to any online advertising efforts that you are probably putting your money and efforts towards, because even though you're gathering all that relevant traffic, like I said, if the users don't really stay back to experience your website, most of that effort really goes to waste. Now, while having a fast website is important, it's also important to understand what is the user's perception of speed and how fast is fast, and what really makes a user tick when it comes to the mobile site speed. Now, there was a fairly interesting research that was done by the Ericsson Consumer Lab, and some of you might find it funny, but what they did was that they made, say, a specific user base go through different kinds of testing situations. And what they found was that users, when they were experiencing mobile delays, they had the same amount of stress levels as someone who was watching a horror film. Now, it is funny, but what you might want to pay specific attention to is that the heart rate for a user actually increases by 38% when they're dealing with delays on mobile content. And like I mentioned before, smartphone users tend to be a lot more finicky and less patient. So if not anything else, just make sure that you're not providing stress to your users the moment they land on your website. Now, moving beyond that, I think for more, say, business-specific numbers or more, bottom line specific details, what we see is that the need for speed is so imperative that we find in our research that almost 53% of users or customers can abandon a website if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. And by this, what I mean is that if in the first 3 seconds, all that is being served on a website is a blank screen, there are chances that a user will move back and search for an alternative, faster website. 29% of smartphone users actually say that they'll switch to another site if the one they are on is too clumsy or slow, doesn't load that well, doesn't render that well on a smartphone. And 1 in 5 dissatisfied visitors actually suggest that they will never return to a website where they have previously faced problems. Even to yourself, I would like you to introspect and think about when was the last time you actually revisited a website when they delivered a poor performance to you or a poor experience to you to begin with. So first impressions are extremely important as well. Now, moving beyond that, what we did was we also did sort of a status of mobile web check, sort of to understand, where most advertisers, where most websites currently land when it comes to looking at the speed perspective. And in a very exhaustive research, we actually crawled about 900,000 mobile ad landing pages. And we're currently actually crawling much more than that. It's at about 6.5 million right now. But more importantly, what we found was that almost 70% of those pages that we crawled through the mobile AdWords landing pages, we found that most of them weighed more than 1 megabyte. And as you can understand, the more the page weight of a web page, the more the page weight of a website, the more time it will take for that page to load or render on a smartphone. The other interesting thing to note over here is speed index. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of what speed index really implies, it's the amount of time a website takes to become interactive and fully rendered on the first screen. So in case you're seeing blank pages throughout or incomplete content on your mobile phone, that's sort of adding up to your speed index. Now, according to this research, what we found that the speed index for almost 70% of pages was more than 7,000, which means that it takes more than 7 seconds for a majority of websites out there to have their content become interactive as soon as the user lands up on that page. And do think of the last time you actually waited for like 7 seconds for a website to load on your smartphone. I mean, unless you're really, really bought into the website, chances are that you'll just move on. We also found out that a lot of this problem can be addressed almost immediately. Almost 25% of such pages could save 25% or more of their weight by simple measures like compressing images and text, which does not take a lot of developer time or resource as well. So while it is a largely vast problem that we see in the industry, I feel a lot of this can be resolved through short and immediate measures. Now, moving forward from there, what we also found is that the average load time for mobile pages on 4G is about 5.5 seconds. Of course, on 3G, this tends to become a lot higher. And what you need to understand is that most of your users would be probably on a fast 3G to a slow 4G mode whenever they're probably on the go and looking for your website or services. So 5.5 to say whatever the next number is on 3G devices is probably the amount of time it's taking for your website to load currently. We also believe that now not only do users tell us that having this great fast loading experience is important for them, even here at Google, what we feel is it's absolutely imperative for our user experience that most websites do load faster, which is one of the reasons why starting fairly soon, the Google organic search rankings will start getting impacted by the amount of load time or the speed of the landing pages that are being searched for. So if today your landing pages or your website is extremely slow, chances are that once these changes take effect, that your organic search visibility might actually reduce a lot more. And I believe a lot of you are actually managing, say, AdWords accounts for a customer or a client. And it may not always be possible for you to go into that amount of depth to talk about websites, because most of your job might entail you to restrict your recommendations or your conversations to AdWords. But this is one aspect of AdWords that I feel is extremely important, because regardless of how much you optimize your campaigns or your keywords, if the website is not good enough to deliver a strong experience, most of that effort will actually go to waste. So considering that we'll be making almost sweeping changes on organic search rankings going forward from the lens of speed, I think it's a great opportunity for you to discuss this with your advertisers, or if you're an advertiser yourself, do mention these things with your developers. Make sure that speed is a conversation that is right on top whenever you're having, say, your business meetings or whatever agenda that you're setting for your meetings. Make sure that speed is one aspect of a conversation that is always placed with a high importance. Now, moving forward from there, we did actually a quick analysis of most people who had registered for this session today. And what we found that was, very interestingly, that while we tested this on 3G, most websites participating in today's sessions were actually loading in about 10 seconds. So, which is quite a matter of concern, because 3G is still a pretty prevalent sort of bandwidth at which most people browse websites through. And like I said, it need not be rocket science that solves this issue for you. Some of the solutions are fairly easy and fairly simple. But considering that 10 seconds is the average that we're looking at currently for today, I think it is high time that you discuss these things with your developers and make sure that you set achievable targets for yourself and for your company, and continue to meet them. Also, on the same point, what I would like all of you to focus on is to make sure that speed actually becomes more of a discipline than, say, flavor of the month, because what we find is that a lot of advertisers suddenly hear and listen to our talks or go through a certain presentation on why speed is important, and it becomes like a flavor of the month for the company. And then after that, say in the next marketing season, in the next high season, they change the look and feel of their website and it goes back to scratch again. So make sure speed is an ongoing discipline. It is something that you set as a requirement for your developers or for your clients' developers, that regardless of how many times there are new iterations made to a website, that you should always be sticking to a certain standard. And that standard, I would suggest, would be always loading at about 5 seconds when testing on 3G. Now, a lot of times what we also find is that quite a few customers or developers move through phases of understanding about their mobile sites. It can start with denial that, okay, my website is not that slow. Probably I receive a lot of users on Wi-Fi, so it shouldn't be that big a problem. But I think what's imperative for all of you to know is that your websites and your ads should be equally accessible for users across the board, and you shouldn't be too bothered about the more minute points of the details around whether they're coming from Wi-Fi or on 3G or on 4G. What you should always make sure is, just as a hygiene, that your website loads fast, and that will go a long way in making sure that there's a consistent, frictionless experience that is delivered to most of your customers. And we see a lot of customers sort of moving through these phases of moving from denial to really more of an acceptance that mobile is important, and this is a stage that you need to figure out. This is an aspect that you should have a concrete strategy around. Now, we've spoken a lot about why speed is important, but let's probably take a look at what are the leading reasons for slower speed. And like I said, most of these things are not really rocket science. These are immediately solvable. They have ready-made solutions already available that you can ask your developers to look into, and I'm sure it wouldn't take them a lot of time to get these in order. So the leading reason actually is images. What we find is that, and like we've discussed before, the heavier a website pages, the more time it would take to load. It's pretty logical. There's a very direct correlation to that. Images actually make up almost 63% of the total weight of the average page. And what we find is that often websites, like I said, have been designed in the past from a desktop first approach. So you don't really care too much about what kind of size or how many pixels the images really take up. As vast as possible, as detailed as possible is the way you would like to go. But a lot of these images can actually be compressed without losing their quality. And what you should make sure is that most of your developers understand that if an image can be compressed, just compress it. Use the right format and size. Always compress your images before you put them on, because while it may not cost you a lot of bandwidth or a lot of load time on desktop devices, it may cost you a lot when it comes to the smartphones. Moving forward from there, I think resource requests, again, this becomes a bit more technical, so wouldn't want to spend too much time on it. But basically, it's the number of times the user's device needs to interact with your servers to gain various resources and make up the entire web page. So the lesser number of resource requests that you make, the easier or the faster it is for the website to load on the user's end. So just make sure that the resource requests, and this is something, again, if you speak to a developer about, they'll immediately get it, that the lower number of resource requests you make, the faster will be your load time for the user. Another thing that we feel can often complicate the load time conversation is heavy use of JavaScript. Now, I can understand that for certain businesses and for certain kinds of websites, this is a necessary evil, but have a conversation with your developers to understand, is JavaScript being unnecessarily used on your website, and can it actually be done away with, or if scripts can be broken up and put through lazy loading. And those kinds of suggestions and solutions can often help in getting these things moving. They can also visit our external resource on Page Speed Insights, which has a lot of details around how to tackle the JavaScript conversation. Again, we're getting probably a bit technical here, but wouldn't want to go too much into the details. It is something that you should be aware of, is JavaScript at times does not really help the landing page load time. So wherever possible, if it's not absolutely imperative or necessary for your website to function, try to avoid using JavaScript. Also, what we find is that there's a lot of unnecessary use of fonts. And while it might seem like a very unnecessary detail, it is something that tends to add up in terms of that load time. So if there is not a very, very significant requirement for you to have custom fonts, again, this is something that your developer can easily work on, is just to make sure that the fonts that they are using are not ones that take up a lot of bandwidth for the load time. Redirects is another problem that we find, is that due to, say, some interstitial page of which the website needs to bounce off, it tends to keep on adding in terms of load times. So again, if you can focus a bit on that, make sure that there are not a lot of redirects that are sort of slowing down your site. If they're not necessary, I would suggest that you take them out. Again, it's the same with HTTPS requests. Just make sure that, wherever possible, these certificates, even though they are significantly important, just make sure that they are configured correctly so that they don't just keep on adding up to that load time. So again, you can go back to this video and look at all of these steps again, or what you can do is, refer your developer to Google Page Speed Insights, where they can get some of these data points and some of these recommendations readily available. But I would suggest that if not anything else, if not redirects or HTTPS requests, just make sure that all of them focus on images. I think compressing images is a very, very standard way of making sure that you're setting up your website for a much faster load time. So if not anything else, just make sure that you're compressing all of your images whenever they're being put, or say new iterations of your websites are coming up. Make sure all the images are compressed as a discipline. Now, when it comes to the framework for faster mobile websites, of course, we've talked about the leading reasons for this. But if I were to set up like a framework for you to, have as a guiding principle for your current versions of your websites or the future iterations of your websites coming up, what I would suggest is look at these three things. So firstly, give a good impression, try to set up a goal of say less than 3 seconds for 4G or less than 5 seconds on 3G. Make sure that the website is interactive and, at least above the fold content, which means, the moment you load your website without scrolling down, if the content really loads well within 3 seconds, chances are that the user will stay back. Make sure that that is a goal that you set for all pages across your website. Reduce the number of requests. So make sure there are not more than 80 requests that are happening from the user's device to your server in order to render the page on the smartphone. And lastly, just make sure that the page weight does not exceed 1 MB. We've seen fantastic web pages around the world that do actually meet this principle. So it's not that this would affect the look and feel of your site, or you'll have to sacrifice certain aspects of your design because of it. You can still have great website experiences and still meet most of these requirements. So what I would recommend most of you is probably to take a screenshot of this slide and just make a printout of it and give it to your developers so that they make sure that almost all of your pages on the website actually meet all of these criteria, and they set it as a discipline for any future iterations of your website. Like I said, make sure that this is set as a discipline and not like a flavor of the month. Again, like when we talk about mobile site optimization in general, it's kind of like moving into a new house. Just make sure that you pack things that are the most essential. And that will make sure that you require fewer trips. And what I'm really referring to over here is with the resource requests. Another way to make sure that you're making fewer trips is by using certain compression mechanisms like gzip that make sure that you're bundling up your resources and they're being compressed, and that way you're making fewer trips to come back and forth from the device to your website server. So just make sure that the version of your website that you have up and running only requires the most essential items first, and the things that you don't need can be loaded as the user keeps on browsing through your website. Right. So in terms of fixing this problem, I would suggest that, as someone who probably is not as much involved in the web development side of things, how you can still influence and keep a tab and make sure that you're heading in the right direction. We'll probably put it in 3 steps. Now, while I've mentioned these 3 steps, how I would probably portray it is the first step is, move out of denial, have regular health checks to understand if your website is doing well. Second is, while it says use of data to justify design and content, what I would suggest is look at data and introspect on where exactly you can improve your website. And the third piece, which is on AMP, what I would suggest for you to look at it as is, looking out for those future technologies that can really help take your website experience to the next level. So moving out of denial, doing introspection, looking out for new technologies. These are the 3 more or less pillars that I would like you to focus on when it comes to having an ongoing discipline of looking at your mobile websites and moving beyond just looking at the AdWords when it comes to your online marketing performance. Before we move on to these 3 steps, another point that I'd like to highlight for you is that even though most of you have joined this session today because you're probably involved with AdWords in a certain way or with the Google Partners program, helping your websites isn't something that necessarily just helps you with AdWords. Any other kind of marketing that you're doing, be it offline or online, if users end up on your website, having a better website actually makes a huge difference. So not only will it benefit your AdWords strategy, it will also benefit you with any other kind of advertising that you're doing, as long as the user is ending on your website. So try to look at it from that angle as well, and make sure that this is an ongoing discipline for your users and for your customers' experience. Right. With that out of the way, let's focus on the use of frequent speed audits. Like I said, move out of that denial phase and make sure you do probably a bi-weekly check of your mobile website. A fairly easy way of doing this, and in a very non-technical fashion, if I can put it that way, is to just go to test my site. So if you just Google test my site .thinkwithgoogle.com or test my site think with Google. If you just search for that, you'll be able to get this website. All you need to do is just enter your URL, and it will give you sort of like your load time, how many visitors potentially you're losing because of slow load times, and how you really compare against the rest of your industry. And that gives you a very good idea of, if you're really lagging behind, or even if you are leading in terms of your industry, it's still sort of gives you a certain indication that there is more that you can do to really help your website. Of course, what it ends with is a very detailed and actionable report that is sent to you by email. So whenever you're running this test, you can also, just get an email for yourself and get, say, more in-depth recommendations like the ones that we were talking about in terms of, resource request, image compression, things of that nature that are a bit more technical. You will also be able to get like such a detailed actionable report for your website. So my sort of advice to all of you is that, make sure that at least for your most important landing pages, make it a discipline to sort of check it every 2 weeks on probably Test My Site, or even on maybe Google PageSpeed Insights. But make sure you make it a discipline to check it every 2 weeks to make sure that your website is always doing well and is not suffering in any way due to load times. Moving forward from there, like I said, like the second aspect after moving out of the denial is to make sure that you're introspecting on data and understanding where exactly do you need to focus more on when it comes to design. Now, speed will take care of a lot of things, but design and content development is also equally important. The way users can interact or browse through your website will often make sure whether a person who's interested is actually a person who becomes your customer. So when we look at it from that angle, a few data points that come to mind and are probably relevant for all of you is 58% of people are, more than half is likely to buy from a mobile website that allows for quick purchases. Again, we've mentioned this before. Smartphone users tend to be quite a bit impatient and don't really like to wait a lot or have too many steps involved. So the quicker you can make the process for a user from the point of discovery to the point of sale, the quicker you can make that process, the easier it will be for you to have those users convert more and more on your mobile sites. Again, the other aspects are that I feel that one of the key steps to a purchase where I feel a lot of users sort of drop off, and we have data to sort of substantiate it as well, is the part where you have to fill a form. And form filling isn't a very pleasant experience on a smartphone, or at least on a smaller screen. And what we usually find is that most users tend to bounce off right at that point where you've added something to a cart, but you just need to fill out a form. And this is where something as easy as an autofill can really help you. So what autofill really does, and I'm sure most of you might have used it in one way or another, is that the browser actually stores the information that is very commonly used to fill out a lot of forms. And just by making sure that the autofill function is available on your website, again, your developers should be able to deal with this. We actually find that, sites almost have 25% higher conversion rates just by making sure that autofill is enabled and forms can be filled out quickly. And most websites do tend to require about, say, 5 to 10 fields. And if you can just, make that process a lot more quicker, it will surely add up to the conversion rates that you see on mobile. As the last data point also mentions, we see almost a 30% higher form fulfillment rate if autofill is being used. And not only is this helpful in, say, like an e-commerce or a travel website, but also websites that depend a lot on lead generation. So all you need a user to do is basically fill out a few details so that your call center or your sales team can really reach out to them. So even for lead generation kind of businesses, autofill can make a huge amount of difference for you. So I hope these data points sort of give you some indications moving beyond the speed conversation as well, to in order to look at how to better your website. Like I said, when visitors come to your website, say either through organic channels or through the marketing channels, speed is great. So speed makes sure that at least the first time a visitor comes to your site or page, they actually browse through that content. But from that point onwards, the engagement and action pieces, where they browse the search for products, they visit a product page, they place items in a basket, and they complete a purchase. All of these aspects, I think you should really deep dive into in terms of data, and try to understand if there are certain sections in this purchase funnel where visitors are bouncing off a lot. And then maybe try to formulate a strategy when it comes to your user experience or design to figure out, how can you better these aspects of your website to make sure that even, all of that money and effort that you're spending in gathering that traffic, it's actually leading to more actionable purchases or, form fulfillments or whatever business goal you have in mind. So just make sure that, you're also deep diving into these aspects of your website to make sure that, you are retaining the users and they're not unnecessary bad qualities on a website that are making the users go away, especially in these critical stages. And again, like speed, I would say as a discipline helps in these further stages as well. So even though maybe your first page loads hyper fast, but say the product category page or the product information pages are extremely slow, that can also influence a user to move back. So speed as a discipline is very important for your ad landing pages, but is also equally important for the follow-up pages on your website. So with that out of the way, I think we've dealt with introspection through data. We've dealt with moving out of the phase of denial. Now, what we'd like to focus on is to look at more futuristic technologies when it comes to developing of mobile websites. And AMP, or accelerated mobile pages, is something that we're fairly excited about from that point of view. To give you a basic idea of what AMP is, AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. It is an open source project. Of course, Google has played quite a significant role in sort of promoting this as a technology, but it is an open source initiative, and most of the recommendations and feature updates that we see on AMP actually come from the industry and not from Google. So it is something that I feel the most of the web is collaborating to bring up and build. And in its essence, what it does is that it solves for slow landing pages. What we actually see is that most websites or most pages, when they use AMP, their websites actually load within 1 to 2 seconds. So when you look at that standard of the mobile web, where it is at about, say, 5.5 seconds on 4G and 10 seconds on 3G, this automatically makes sure that you're probably at the most cutting edge when it comes to landing page load times. Also, this isn't rocket science as such. If I were to explain it in very, very basic details, AMP is more or less diet HTML. What you're doing is you're essentially stripping away unnecessary resources and making sure that you have a lean, fast, and efficient website or web page that is running. So accelerated mobile pages is something that we're definitely pretty excited about. Another thing that you might want to keep in mind is that AMP is also compatible with AdWords. So for any AdWords ad that leads users to AMP landing pages, they will also experience that 1 to 2 second load time for a majority of their experiences. Now, building AMPs also means that there is almost near instantaneous loading. Like I said, most websites that we see using AMP have that 1 to 2 second load time. It has a smooth scrolling engagement and frictionless experience. It's also a responsive website, so it makes sure that we actually have quite a few websites that work on AMP on both desktop and on mobile. So while accelerated mobile pages might mislead you to think that this is something that's just for mobile websites, it can also be used for desktop devices as well. And of course, it has a huge opportunity for distribution. It is compatible, obviously, to Google search, but also on a lot of other platforms that we see today, like Bing is compatible to it, Twitter is compatible to it. We see even Pinterest having, if you search for, say, certain kinds of images, you'll probably see a lot of AMP pages coming up from Pinterest as well. So it is something that we see broadly the web has really embraced and is sort of paying high importance on. And this is essentially to make sure that we just do away with the evil of slow landing page load times. And this is where I feel a lot of our future is headed towards as well, is to have that near instantaneous loading experience available for all websites across the mobile web. And just imagine by how much will it reduce the friction of operating on your smartphone while browsing through products or services. Now, while it might sound like a fairly new technology for some of you, AMP has actually been around for a couple of years now and has seen almost a widespread adoption around the world. There was a recent research that was done by Forrester. I would highly recommend all of you to go through it. But in that report that Forrester did around the total economic impact of AMP, they have sort of discuss some of these points, like almost 4 billion AMP pages have been published all over the world across 25 million domains, which is an absolutely huge scale. We've also found that users tend to spend almost 2 times the amount of time on an AMP page as opposed to a regular website page. I think it has more to do with the way the page really loads. If it loads faster, then of course chances are that users will spend more time browsing the site rather than waiting for it to load. And also we've seen almost 20% increase in sales for conversions with AMP. And again, conversions can mean different things for different websites, but for most business goals set for AMP pages, we've actually seen that number go up by 20%. And while this is something that the Forrester report sort of discloses in its research, you can also go to ampproject.org and find quite a few case studies from all over the world from different kinds of verticals, where you'll find so many businesses that have incredibly benefited by the use of accelerated mobile pages. So, I mean, just to name a few over here that I've mentioned, as you can see, these come from all kinds of different verticals, all kinds of different backgrounds. Like Monetti is a website that is in the finance domain from Sweden. No Broker and Wigo are companies based in India. Oxfam was based in Spain. Event Tickets was based in the US. Exact was from a B2B vertical. Again, B2B is another vertical where you often find that mobile is placed on a lower importance, but even they, being a B2B business, found that there was a great improvement on their conversion rates by using AMP. So Exact was a company that was based out of the Netherlands. So as you can see, there's a widespread sort of, deployment and adoption of AMP, and various kinds of businesses from all spheres of life are really benefiting from the use of it. So I'll leave you with that thought that, once you've probably fixed on the fundamentals of your website, you can start looking at, some of these technologies to help you forward. Or if you feel that this does make sense for you to work on immediately, you can actually even leapfrog into AMP and sort of let go of those day-to-day transactional optimizations for image compressions and resource requests and things of that nature. AMP is more or less, like I said, like a standard for the web. And as long as, I guess, your websites are being developed through AMP, or as long as they meet AMP standards, they'll always be fast or faster than, what your regular website is currently. So that also makes sure that, if you're having future iterations of your website and they're all being built by AMP, or with the AMP methodologies in mind, you need not worry about the speed aspect as much as you would have to if, say, you were running a regular website where you need to make those changes on a regular basis. So this is, again, like a sneak peek for you, for something for you to consider and probably discuss either within your own company or with your advertisers, that maybe this is one of the ways that you can move forward with your future planning. One interesting point that I would like to also point out over here is that I guess most of you are, great experts on AdWords and have spent a lot of time optimizing, say, campaigns, keywords, ad texts. What I, in my experience, have seen is that all those optimizations and efforts probably have an effect on conversion rates, but may not be as close to the quantum of effect that we see over here when it comes to building better website pages. So I mean, even if you spend all that effort in optimizing your campaigns to the best possible extent, if the websites are not good enough, that effort actually just goes to waste. And by working on something that is as simple and hygienic as mobile site speed, you can actually see how these companies have benefited. Almost by factors of 20% of more, they've started seeing increase in conversion rates. So when it comes to placing your efforts with different kinds of business objectives, I guess the website makes a lot more sense as well, because the quantum of performance improvement can be a lot higher than maybe day-to-day optimizations on your campaigns and keywords. So I'd like to leave you with that thought. Make sure that all your efforts that go towards online advertising are not cut short by poor website experiences, and also take this as an opportunity to really come closer to the developer side of your business. They are an integral portion of what makes online marketing tick. So make sure you're having these open and forward-thinking conversations with your developer team, with your technical teams. All right. With that, I think I've more than beaten all of you up on the head with the importance of having fast landing pages. But I'd like to open it up for sort of any questions that you might have. Of course, we have a chat box that you'll be able to see in the live stream. If you have any questions, please write to them. We'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to address some of them. I'll just quickly have a look through if you've had any questions coming yet. If not, if you think there are certain aspects you would like me to focus a bit more on, or if you feel that there are certain questions that you might have in mind, I'd be more than happy to sort of go forward with it. I see that there are sort of a few questions that have come in. I think one has come in from Shefali asking, is AMP free or is it a paid service? So Shefali, thanks for that question. AMP, like I said, is an open source initiative. The only amount that you really pay is to your developers. I mean, if you already have an in-house developer, just ask them to start looking at AMP a bit more. We have a ton of resources that are already available. If you go to ampproject.org or ampstart.com, you can even find like templates that are readily available. So all you need to do is just download that template, customize it to your website, and put it up. It's also important to understand that it's a landing page solution. So you don't really need to change your landing page or change the entire structure of your website. For using AMP, you can just test it within that silo of one important landing page and see how that's functioning, and then maybe scale it out to the rest of your website. And for most developer teams that we find is that they can develop an AMP page within about 5 days time. So and from the first AMP page onwards, what we find is that once a developer has that template at hand, they can easily scale it for the rest of their website. All right, the next question that I'd take is probably from Mohammad. I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. He's mentioned, what is the best practice for forms on mobile? Do we reduce the number of fields compared to desktop? That's a good question. Of course, there are certain details that you may not be able to do away with, like credit card information obviously is important. But if you feel there are certain fields that you can do away with, or it's not very critical information for your business, I would suggest that you remove those form fields from the mobile version of the site. Another aspect that you can consider, obviously, is to use autofill that automatically makes sure that most of the redundant fields that are being filled over and over again on the browser are automatically filled the moment the user ends up on that form section. Another, I think, point that a lot of you might want to consider is a lot of websites tend to, make users sign in compulsorily before they can browse through a product or buy a product. Just allow them to maybe purchase as a guest first, and you would have their email IDs, and you can then entice them over an email to sign up as a user. But that is also one restriction that I find very commonly, that unless you can sign up for the website, you can't buy a product. So always allow users to have that option to purchase as a guest as well. All right, I'll probably take a question. I think Rob has asked us, what do you recommend for forms on AMP pages? My developer is a bit stuck there. I would probably recommend a couple of things here. So there is a certain, without getting into too much detail, there is a certain frame of code that is available called AMP forms, and that sort of makes it very, very easy for developers to create forms on AMP pages. So just ask them to look up for AMP forms, or go to ampproject.org and you should be able to find this. If not anything else, like I said, there's another website called AMP Start, where you can actually find ready-made templates available, and you can just customize it for your website and find those form fields available readily for you. And even if that doesn't work, then your developer can actually go to this resource called GitHub. So, which is where a lot of specific use cases around AMP will start being discussed over there by various other developers. And if there are challenges that have been faced previously by other developers, they will be discussed, and workarounds will be discussed on GitHub. So that is another resource that I would recommend for you. I would probably take last question from Victoria, who said, in your opinion, how the mobile performance will change within the next 2 years? I mean, again, it's difficult to predict what will happen over the next 2 years, given that how far we've come over the last 2 years. What I do feel is that mobile will continue to be extremely important, and because of that, we're seeing a majority of websites getting more than 50 to 60% of traffic on mobile already. And even if you look at, say, the next generation of internet users, most of them are experiencing the internet for the first time on a mobile device. Even if you look at, say, some of the countries in the Asian region, countries like India or China or Southeast Asia, you'll find that mobile is actually the first place where they're experiencing internet for the first time. So while a lot of the 90s generation or the generation before that have experienced internet for the first time on a desktop device and then sort of evolved into a mobile device, the next generation of internet users will probably experience it for the first time on a mobile device. So it's very, very important for you to have that as a mindset when you're developing your website and you're working on even your online marketing strategy. You should make sure that even the ads you create or the creatives that you create have that mobile first mindset present. Okay, I can see a few more questions trickling in. I think we probably have time for one more. So Pradeep has asked us, is there a technical know-how for a company building a mobile version, like speed, compressing images and text to improve landing page performance on mobile web pages somewhere in our repository? So like I said, like I mentioned throughout the presentation, there are quite a few resources that you can use to that effect. If you're building a mobile version of your website, what are the things you can keep in mind? Like I said, Test My Site is a great place to start. But even if you're looking at, say, speed and compressing images, what I would suggest is, just start off by making sure those 3 principles that I spoke of is, make sure that you're making sure that your landing page load time is within 3 seconds or 5 seconds on 3G. You're always making sure that there are less than 80 requests that are being made while the page is rendering, and that the page itself doesn't weigh more than 1 MB. I think if you follow these 3 principles, it will help you create a more or less good version of a mobile website. In terms of compressing images and text, you will find more details on that on Page Speed Insights and even on Test My Site. to gain further insights into that. But as long as you're meeting those three principles of making sure that your site is loading in less than 5 seconds, you're making sure that there are less than 80 requests coming in for the site, and the site does not weigh more than 1 MB, you're actually in a very good position. And like I said, just make sure that this is set more as a discipline, because even in my experience, I've found that companies, when they are building the mobile version of the website, they place a huge amount of importance there. But while other priorities take over, that's somehow forgotten. It's not a one-shot thing. Just make sure it's something that is looked upon over and over again as a hygiene check. What I would suggest most of you is to probably have a bi-weekly check-in with your developers to make sure that at least your most important landing pages are loading quickly and fast. And then start looking at other aspects like user experience and design. Maybe have that conversation about AMP, and see if that's making sense for your business as well. So with that, I'll probably come to an end to today's session. Thank you so much for the questions and for attending this session. I hope you found it useful. Please do give us your feedback. I'm sure most of you will receive a feedback form. So please do give us your feedback. Let us know how we can improve these sessions for you. And I hope you found this useful. Make sure that speed is on top of your mind, and that's what I leave you with. Thank you so much for your time. Goodbye.